Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And on today's episode, ancient DNA shows that Stone Age Europeans voyaged by sea to Africa, having crossed the Mediterranean Sea and had developed seafaring technology at this point, which has been a hot topic of discussion and something that across the world we're finding humans have independently developed boats on a lot of separate occasions, and it's one of the most prolific forms of transportation, especially in these historic ages.
Yep. Well, for one thing, it gets you across water, and you don't have to deal with an angry animal
Like the Kraken.
like horses and donkeys. Those things are not fun to deal with if you don't already know what you're doing.
But it's very interesting because, as historians and as archaeologists, you generally understand that they had technology to cross the sea because some places would not be accessible without seafaring boats, like all of Polynesia. And even now in North America, they're starting to discover that prehistoric peoples used boats to hop down the coast from island to island as they made their way further south. And here in Europe, it was always a question of, well, when did Europeans start going to Africa and vice versa? When did we start crossing the Mediterranean? Did we walk all the way around or did we cross a land bridge? Did we sail?
And one of the things that is really, kind of been a big question with that is one, there's not really been a lot of early evidence, and two, a lot of the big civilizations that come out of Europe tend not to have seafaring as a major technological strength. The Romans weren't very good at seafaring. Most of the Greeks really weren't good at it, with the exception of the Athenians. And that's kind of saying something. Most of the strong seafaring nations out there come from Carthage, which was in Tunisia, or Tyre, which was in what is now the Levant, Israel, Palestine, that mess. So it's like the focus of where are the Europeans with boats? That doesn't really get explored a lot because the Europeans weren't really seafarers for the longest time.
And it's very interesting because they've been able to tell based on studying genomes and doing DNA sequencing that agriculture about 12 was invented in the Middle East about 12,000 years ago and spread to Europe, but the southern Mediterranean hasn't been all that well studied, and that's part of a bias to a lot of European nations. That was the hotbed of early studies. Not many people crossed over to Africa, and when they did, they gravitated towards like the Egyptian side of things.
Yeah.
So it left this void, and that unfortunately is fairly common in archaeology, where there's these huge information gaps of areas that have traditionally been just understudied or outright ignored in a lot of cases. So this is one where researchers are now going back and studying and trying to find out more information, and that's exactly what happened. A population geneticist at Harvard Medical School named David Reich co-led this study and worked with researchers where they sequenced DNA from teeth of bones or teeth of about 9 different individuals in Maghreb at the archaeology sites, and those dated between 6 and 10,000 years ago. So a massive time spread.
Yep. And what's interesting in that time spread, because there's a small sample size and some big time spread here. We're talking about 10,000-year-old bones here. There's not a lot of those around, so anything we can get is basically definitive. And what he found was that about 8,500 years ago, the genome shifts, and we start getting markers that weren't there before, that markers are indicative of Europeans start showing up in the little DNA records of these people's bones.
Well, and it's very cool too because one of the things we can actually tell by the DNA, specifically carbon and nitrogen in the bones, is what their diet was. You can tell where people originated, and this is one of my favorite things, is your DNA in your bones is tied to the geographic region in which you are living. Your teeth, on the other hand, since they are formed much earlier on, tend to link back to where you were originally from. So they can actually sequence your DNA to tell where you are from versus where you had lived or where you even got buried. And they can start creating more of a picture of what this movement looked like and what these people had gone through. And that's exactly what they did here. And then on top of that, with the carbon and nitrogen in your bones, you can also get an idea for what the diet may have consisted of. If you ate a lot of carbon rich plants or animals, or if you ate a lot of nitrogen rich, and you can kind of deduce where you lived based on that.
Yeah. The saying "dead men tell no tales" is absolutely not true. You just need a bone saw and a genome sequencer.
It's a very destructive process to analyze the DNA, but it can produce some very cool results.
Yep. And I know that I believe this group, the article mentions, are understood to have come from Sicily into what is now Tunisia. But personally, I just want to just throw out the label here of early British attempts to invade Africa, because we've got boat Europeans coming down and landing on another continent.
No, this was the Sicilians. This had a very special touch. Them Sicilians, they're very creative and they like to make boats and they like to sail across the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But it poses a very unique conundrum that we're seeing worldwide where dates for the earliest boats developed keep getting pushed further and further back, and we're starting to understand now that this is similar to agriculture and similar to other technologies, but has been independently invented all across the world at different points and in different ways. And each way serves such a cool purpose. And this shows that Europe and Africa have always been intrinsically interlinked. You have people crossing that barrier of water going back and forth. They weren't as isolated as may have previously been thought.
Yep. And what's fun about this too is with the Sicilians here, these are indigenous Sicilians. These are Sicilians before the Greeks arrive, before the Carthaginians arrive, before the Romans arrive, before all these other places start coming to Sicily and adding to it. This is the original like Model T of the Sicilians coming down and doing this. And that's very fun because you don't get to see that version of Sicily very often, because for so much of history, it's had other things mixed in to make Sicily. So this is the first ingredient, and that's fun. Seeing that interacting with the larger world is very exciting for me personally.
And it's also interesting to me the techniques that were utilized. Like they talk about this island hopping strategy where they would go from island to island and maybe not have such a massive journey where they're on open waters for so long, and it adds a very human aspect to this whole thing in my opinion. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's very human nature to just kind of stop over to break up a long journey to maybe not make the risk or try to make it all in one go, which also may not have been feasibly possible, but
Yeah.
humans just love a challenge and they don't like thinking no is an option. So it doesn't matter how big the journey may seem, how daunting, they will find a way to make it happen. And I think that's probably a great point for us to wrap up on this episode. It's a very interesting topic, and we don't hear much about the archaeology coming out of Tunisia, especially in terms of the Stone Age and hunter and gatherers. Like you said, we hear a lot about Carthage and that area and time period, but
Yeah. No, there's it's kind of a void, that goes back more than what, 2,500 years.
yeah. But let us know your guys' thought in the comments down below, and we will see you in the next video.